Hey everybody, how's it going? If you want to follow along, you can start by navigating to today's class plan. Part 1 will give you an overall instruction. The plan for the video is as follows. I'm going to give you a quick review of textual editing, covering Hamlet's extant texts and the challenges that editors face. So that'll be a review of what we covered both in the introduction to our textbook and then in the quiz. Give you a quick overview of the end of Hamlet 4.5, 5 through 7, and ways to think about those passages in terms of bad collections and editing. Give you a quick overview of an editing and textual bibliography sample page that I made that you can use when you put together your own editing textual bibliography page for the group website, and then a very quick overview of the activity that I would like you to complete after you watch the video. All right, so first of all, you'll remember from the introduction and from lecture that Hamlet exists in 3 extant, that is, the oldest versions of the manuscripts in existence, are not in Shakespeare's hand, but rather printed. You remember that Q1, not featured here, is a text produced by an actor who played likely Marcellus in a shortened version of the play that was played in, or the plays that are recorded both in Q2 and in F1. All right, so Q2 was published in 1604, 1605. The first folio was compiled by Shakespeare's colleagues and then printed and sold for the first time in 1623 to both commemorate Shakespeare's death, drive up revenue for their theater, and keep Shakespeare's memory both intact and to produce it differently than it existed when he was still alive. Here is a little video of a fellow printing using a reconstructed Gutenberg. So we'll just watch this for a second.
You just took a bowl.
Well, ever since that first.
Okay. Now we have to come straight down with the ink balls to get the ink just on the tops of those letters. If we went like that, it'd smear off onto the edges, wouldn't fill the letters in. So coming straight down, you begin to apply the ink to the tops of those letters. The person that did this became known as the beater. And of course, it took a little practice and skill to do this, because we have to get a little ink on every letter. And we can't get too much on a letter because that would just fill it in. Okay, now I forgot where I was at. Invented in China. I come to Europe through Italy. Now the paper was being made for the scribes, and so it was hard and slick, didn't work very well with Gutenberg's oil-based ink. So he had to soften the paper by dampening it. Now I knew that if he just laid a sheet on like this and rolled it under there, he couldn't make, and roll it into, let's see. He's got to figure out how to print on the other side to line it up exactly. And so here's the answer to that problem, the tympan and the frisket. I'll open it up here. This is called the tympan. It's just leather over a frame that provides a place for us to put our paper on. These little points called duckbills position it up and down. And then the mark left and right here. Now watch this. These pins poke through the paper. And when he prints on the other side, he puts the paper back on through those same handle, which turns the screw and lowers the plug and presses the paper against the inky type. The person that did this was called a very exotic name, the puller. So we're going to have some of you guys and gals be pullers. We're going to do 2 impressions. So why don't you come and do our first impression? Age. Now we'd like to have some of the gals do it. How about
Go for it.
Oh, that sounds pretty good. Sticky
Press kiss.
Oh boy.
We did pretty good.
Wow.
You did a pretty good inking job and a pretty good pulling job.
All right, so that's it. That's the technology that revolutionized the world. So again, both the quarto and the folio were printed on a press just like that reconstructed one. The difference being quartos are folded into fourths and folios are folded into half. And Shakespeare's quarto, the Q2 was printed in and around the first time Hamlet was played on stage at the Globe, and then the 1623 folio was printed later. And one thing to note is there are some key differences between quarto and folio. Chief among them is Q2 includes the 4-4 speech that Hamlet gives in response to Fortinbras's troops marching across Denmark to attack Poland, and F1 does not. So here, you'll remember, here's how all occasions.
Go a little before. All occasions do inform against me, spurn dull revenge. What is a man?
Okay, so if you're trying to make an argument about Hamlet and you're suggesting that this scene is a pivotal turning point where Hamlet goes from being inactive to active, what do you do if the text you're reading doesn't include this key scene? Or if you're an editor putting together an edition, how do you account for the inclusion or exclusion of not only this scene, but myriad variants? So, just to show you, here is, all right, here's a facsimile of the Q2 that shows us that the start of Act 4, Scene 4 is identical to the passages that are reprinted in our book. One thing to note is that act and scene divisions were added by Alexander Pope in 1725. Pope is Shakespeare's second editor. So another thing that we can consider is the ways in which, even though editors strive, especially contemporary editors, to avoid interfering with the text so that they can produce a text as free of their own interpretation as possible, there's no getting around the history of ways in which both editors and printers shape and produce Shakespeare's text. All right, so here's a facsimile of Q2-4-4. So enter Fortinbras with this army over the stage. But then when we turn to when we turn to the same act and scene in the folio, the only thing that remains is enter Fortinbras with the army and this quick exchange between the captain and Fortinbras. So again, what's gained, what's lost by including or excluding how all occasions. So finally, here's a quick shot of our book. And so our book follows the act and scene division started by Alexander Pope in 1725. And then we also get, beyond making decisions over which edition to use as a control text, which speeches to include or exclude based on that control text, and presenting the history of editorial emendations, the other things that editors do are they gloss, right, or explain complicated or obtuse passages, words, metaphors, etc., within the text, right? So this footnote tells us in our book, this footnote explains the ways in which other editions have dealt with the inclusion or exclusion of how allocations in 4.4. Finally, this note at the bottom tells readers when editors or publishers have changed or revised stage directions, added a scene break, and also shows the variance between Q2 and F. So again, if Hamlet's a play in part about double meanings or triple meanings and about the ways in which a single term can contain multitudes, so too is the editorial process a way to make possible more than one meaning in a line, right? So, okay, so what does all of this mean for us? I think one thing that we can think. So while it'll be great for you to include in the editing textual bibliography page of your group website note on variance or textual emendation, remember that the bulk of the work that you're going to be doing on those pages is to provide explanatory gloss that support your claim that this specific scene or passage is a bad collection or demonstrates ways in which the passage or Hamlet as a whole can be read as a bad collection. So to that end, I think one useful example would be looking at Ophelia's speeches from last night's reading as an example of text from Hamlet that both exemplifies the characteristics of bad collection, i.e. a collection of the wrong things, kind of pathological collecting that also signifies within larger social, cultural terms, and then finally the sorts of collections in which the categories that separate the objects in the collection have started to break down and create kind of inability to distinguish the value between the objects in the collection. So to that end, Ophelia comes in at the toward the middle of scene 4. Right, she wants to talk to Gertrude. Gertrude's a little apprehensive, and then this is what it looks like in quarto. Let's see. Okay. So here's what it looks like printed in quarto. Let's see. Gentleman comes in, explains that Ophelia wants to speak to the queen, that she's distracted because her father has died, her brother is gone, and Hamlet's not there any longer. And then when she finally comes in, she says to the queen, "There's rosemary, that's for remembrance. Pray you, love, remember. And there's pansies, that's for thoughts." Laertes responds, "A document in madness, thoughts and remembrance fitted." Ophelia, "There's fennel for you and columbines. There's rue for you, and here's some for me. We may call it herb of grace of Sundays. You may wear your rue with a difference. There's a daisy, blah, blah, blah." All right. So on a thematic level, you can see here are all these objects. She's collecting the objects. The objects are markers of her unreason. Her unreason to think of her as simply mad would be to obscure the larger social conditions under which she's gone crazy. And then finally, speaking specifically to the assignment, you might think if you were a reader of the scene that all of these words that I've highlighted would be a good place to put in a hyperlink to then send the reader out to other portions of the internet that would provide explanation for what exactly those things are. Similarly, with the Queen's final report. So after some intervening action, right, Laertes comes back. Gertrude and Claudius are worried about the kingdom being over, like Laertes overthrowing the kingdom with an army behind him, etc. And then finally, the queen comes in and announces that Ophelia is dead, and then replays these same sets of imagery or of objects, right? There's a willow that grows ascant a brook that shows his hoary leaves in the glassy stream. Therewith fantastic garlands did she make of crown flowers, nettles, daisies, and long purples. And to my earlier point, again, if you were using this sequence in your website, that the flowers that the queen mentions would also be a useful gloss. So, okay. Finally, here is an example of a textual editing and bibliography page that I made. So you can get to it from, if you go to the group website assignment, it's down here in the corner, and then I'll add sample pages for the other pages as we move through the end of the semester. All right, so here's my quick overview. It's pretty drafty. Making an argument about Hamlet and bad collections, and then to develop and support the claim that I'm making, I cut and pasted 5:195 to 242. I cut and pasted it from Internet Shakespeare Q2 modern version. I think one thing to note is there's a bunch of different ways that you can, this is air quotes, like set the text, right? So that is to say, where do you want the speaker markers? How much space do you want between each line? And then how are you going to mark the pagination? So I used a 2-column layout for this to put the text on one hand and then the pagination in a second column on the right. I think all of WordPress obviously, which is what this is, provides the opportunity for double columns, as does Weebly and Wix, I would imagine. But we can talk more about how to set the text later. One other little note with setting the text is, so for example, when stage directions are present, you have to decide how you want to mark the stage directions. And then also similarly, this was kind of a funny thing. So in our text, the names of the characters are in small caps, but I can't do small caps, so I put them in bold. But then does Ophelia, because she's a corpse by that point, does she get small caps, or in my setting bold, or because she's just a dead body, does this noun get put in italics, right? So the skull's in italics, right? Taking the skull, it doesn't get small caps to be marked off as a person because it's a thing. And then to what extent, what choice do I make here? Do I choose to make Ophelia a person by putting her in small caps or bold, or do I choose to make her a thing by putting her name in italics? Okay, final. I'm at the very beginning of this process, so I make my argument, Hamlet's a hoarder, which gives us some insight into the ways that objects have meaning well beyond their intended purpose. So I start with quiddities, just because quiddities seems like a complicated word that people might not understand. I linked it out to the Wikipedia page. Same with quillets. Quillets I send out to this fellow, Jean Baudin, who seems like a good example of the type of person that Hamlet is describing in that first passage. So those are explanatory. Similarly here, sheepskins, out to vellum. This seemed in keeping with some of the things that we've been talking about this semester in terms of objects and collections. And then finally, linked out to clown. This is also explanatory. I think sometimes when I read this scene, I have a contemporary clown in my mind's eye as I read, and this infographic does a good job of providing for my audience a sense of early modern clowns as opposed to like Ringling Brother clowns. Okay, so that's as far as I've gotten. We can go back over this in person, but if we would, the very last thing I would like for you guys to do is, okay, moving back to today's class plan. All right, now that I've given you a review of textual editing, a quick overview of 4, 5 through 7, a little overview of the sample page that you can use as a model for your own website, will you please complete the following activity? So here you guys go. Look for your name in this list at the bottom of today's sample plan or of class plan. And then once you click on it, these will all look the same except for the group names. Okay, I want for each of you to do this underneath your name in the Google Doc. So just find a passage that you might like to use. Remember, you want a passage that you can explain how the passage is itself a bad collection and or how the passage illustrates one characteristic of bad collections. So find the passage, you can cut and paste it, you can just put the notation, axing and line numbers, explain how it's a bad collection or how it illustrates bad collections, and then just quickly find a phrase, word, metaphor, etc., and then explain how or why you would gloss, i.e. link out to another source in support of your overall goal for the passage. All right, everybody, that's it. Thank you for paying attention. That was quite a bit of information. Email me with any questions, and I will have another video up in the next couple of days, and I will see you on Wednesday.